The recent admission by Iranian officials of 2,000 deaths marks a grim milestone in modern political history, echoing tragedies that we thought belonged to the past. For the first time, Tehran has officially quantified the devastating human cost of these 2-week-long protests, a move that has shocked international observers and human rights organizations alike. This unprecedented revelation invites a chilling historical parallel to the events of 1989 in Beijing, where the desperate search for stability also led to bloodshed. While the technological landscapes differ vastly between the two eras, the fundamental dynamics of authority, rebellion, and the violent restoration of order remain strikingly similar. According to reports citing Reuters, the casualty count includes both demonstrators and security forces, painting a picture of chaotic urban warfare rather than simple civil disobedience. Government officials have publicly blamed terrorist elements for the violence, a rhetorical strategy that mirrors the language used by Chinese authorities to describe the turmoil in Tiananmen. The sheer scale of the acknowledged death toll suggests that the internal security apparatus was authorized to use lethal force to prevent the collapse of the regime. Harrowing reports of long lines of body bags waiting for identification have circulated despite severe information restrictions, creating a macabre visual similarity to historical accounts of Beijing. We must examine how a movement sparked by economic grievances rapidly transformed into a fundamental challenge to the legitimacy of the ruling clerical establishment in Iran. In 1989, the initial spark was not purely political, but deeply rooted in inflation and corruption, just as we are seeing unfold in Iran today. The Iranian currency has lost significant value while inflation has soared to 40%, pushing the middle class toward a breaking point of desperation and anger. Similarly, the Chinese economic reforms of the late 80s brought hyperinflation that eroded the savings of ordinary citizens, fueling the initial student-led gatherings in the square. History teaches us that when economic anxiety meets political rigidity, the resulting explosion often transcends class boundaries and unites diverse segments of society against the state. The Iranian government's decision to cut off internet access represents the modern digital equivalent of the martial law and media blackouts imposed on Beijing decades ago. By severing connectivity, the state attempts to isolate protesters from one another and prevent the outside world from witnessing the full extent of the crackdown. International organizations have struggled to verify the data independently, leaving a void of information that is quickly filled by state propaganda and unverified rumors. The acknowledgement of 2,000 deaths might be a strategic calculation to signal the regime's absolute resolve, serving as a terrifying warning to any remaining dissidents. We are witnessing a classic authoritarian dilemma where the cost of concession is viewed as higher than the cost of a violent and bloody suppression. The comparison to Tiananmen is not just about the body count, but about the systemic reaction of a revolutionary government facing its most significant existential crisis. As we delve deeper, we find that the external geopolitical pressures facing Iran today add a volatile layer of complexity that was largely absent in 1989. The looming threat of American military intervention creates a distinct variable that allows Tehran to frame domestic dissent as foreign interference. President Trump's declaration of 25% tariffs on trading partners effectively places Iran in a complete economic stranglehold, exacerbating the internal crisis. In 1989, the Chinese Communist Party faced international sanctions, but they did not face an immediate, credible threat of foreign military invasion. This external pressure acts as a double-edged sword, potentially galvanizing nationalist sentiment while simultaneously depriving the state of resources needed to buy loyalty. We observe a critical divergence in the military apparatus. The Revolutionary Guards operate as an ideological parallel army, much like the PLA's role in securing party survival. The pivotal question remains whether the rank-and-file security forces will continue to obey orders when the violence turns against their own communities. Reports of 2,000 casualties suggest that the regime has already crossed the Rubicon, prioritizing regime survival over any semblance of public legitimacy. The visual of long lines of body bags mentioned in reports serves as this generation's grim equivalent to the tank columns rolling down Chang'an Avenue. Economically, the 40% inflation rate in Iran acts as a constant accelerant, making it impossible for the average citizen to return to normalcy. Unlike the post-Tiananmen era, where China successfully pivoted to rapid economic growth to quell dissent, Iran lacks the geopolitical access to execute such a maneuver. The devaluation of the rial creates a scenario where the government cannot simply print its way out of the crisis without triggering hyperinflation. Washington's reported preparation for military strikes adds a timeline of urgency that forces the Iranian leadership into a defensive and paranoid posture. This paranoia often leads to preemptive violence, where the state strikes hardest not because it is strong, but because it feels cornered. We must also consider the role of the clerics. In China, the party was the ultimate authority, whereas in Iran, religious legitimacy is theoretically paramount. When the slogan "Death to the Dictator" replaces religious chants, it signals a fundamental rupture in the theological contract between the rulers and the ruled. The sheer speed of this escalation, from economic grievances to mass slaughter in just 2 weeks, outpaces the months-long build-up seen in Beijing. Digital suppression creates an artificial silence, leading the international community to underestimate the severity of the conflict until it is too late. The admission of high casualty numbers might ironically be intended to deter foreign intervention by signaling that the cost of regime change would be catastrophic. Historical analysis suggests that when a regime sheds this much blood, the path to peaceful reform is permanently sealed off. The conflict has now evolved into a zero-sum game where the survival of the leadership depends entirely on the total subjugation of the street. The aftermath of Tiananmen saw the Chinese leadership strike a tacit deal with its citizens, offering economic prosperity in exchange for political silence. Iran, however, finds itself in a geopolitical straitjacket that makes such a compromise virtually impossible to achieve in the current climate. Sanctions and isolation mean that the regime cannot offer the carrot of development, leaving them with only the stick of repression. This imbalance suggests that the cycle of unrest will likely continue, with shorter intervals between violent eruptions as the economy deteriorates further. The willingness to admit to 2,000 deaths is a calculated gamble, stripping away the veil of denial to project an image of ruthless strength. Yet, history reminds us that rule by pure fear has a shelf life. It is brittle, harder to maintain, and prone to sudden, catastrophic failure. As we analyze these events, we must recognize that the stability achieved through such means is often an illusion that masks deep structural rot. The international community is left watching a slow-motion tragedy, constrained by the fear that intervention could spark a broader regional war. Ultimately, the comparison between Tehran and Beijing serves as a study in authoritarian resilience and the evolving cost of political survival. Whether in 1989 or today, the price is always paid by the ordinary citizens who dare to imagine a different future. For the global markets, this escalation introduces a significant risk premium to energy prices, reminiscent of the oil shocks that accompanied historical geopolitical crises. If Tehran follows through on its threat to close the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation for U.S. military strikes, we could see oil prices spike violently. Investors must now price in the possibility of a broader conflict that draws in neighboring producers, potentially disrupting a third of the world's seaborne oil supply. The currency markets are already reacting, with the rial's collapse signaling a total loss of confidence in the Iranian economy's ability to weather this storm. Unlike 1989, where China's isolation was primarily political, the current web of sanctions means Iran's economic pain is immediately felt by its trading partners in Asia and Europe. Defense stocks and safe haven assets like gold and the Swiss franc are likely to see increased inflows as capital seeks shelter from the rising geopolitical temperature. The axis of resistance narrative suggests that Iran may utilize asymmetric warfare, posing threats to digital infrastructure and shipping lanes far beyond its borders. This creates a complex risk environment for multinational corporations operating in the Middle East, forcing a reassessment of supply chain vulnerabilities. Just as the Tiananmen crackdown froze foreign direct investment for a period, this violence ensures that Iran will remain uninvestable for the foreseeable future. The ultimate economic lesson here is that without political stability, resource wealth becomes a curse rather than a blessing, fueling conflict instead of development.